When news broke that the Labour Party blocked Andy Burnham's bid to stand in the upcoming by-election, the announcement sent immediate shockwaves through the political landscape, raising questions not only about internal party dynamics, but also about the broader state of British democracy. Burnham, a figure well known for his regional leadership and vocal advocacy on health and social issues, has cultivated a base of support that extends beyond traditional party lines. His exclusion, therefore, is not simply a tactical decision. It is a signal about how party hierarchies exercise control, prioritize loyalty over popularity, and manage the narrative of electability. The hook here is undeniable. When a major political figure is denied the opportunity to compete, the implications extend far beyond the candidate. They speak to the tension between centralized party authority and grassroots representation, a tension that has been simmering quietly for years. This decision must be contextualized within Labour's ongoing struggle to balance ideological coherence with electoral pragmatism. Parties, after all, are not monoliths. They are coalitions of interests, factions, and strategic calculations. Burnham's bid, whether motivated by local needs, national ambitions, or a desire to shift policy priorities, threatened to upset this delicate balance. By intervening decisively, Labour's leadership communicated that the preservation of internal control outweighs the potential energizing effect of a high-profile candidate. Yet this strategy carries inherent risks. Denying a popular candidate a platform may consolidate authority in the short term, but risks alienating voters, discouraging party activism, and reinforcing narratives of elitism that opposition parties are all too eager to exploit. In effect, the move exposes the fault lines between institutional authority and democratic legitimacy. Moreover, the situation invites reflection on the broader implications for representation and accountability. When party hierarchies limit choices, the electorate's capacity to express preferences through candidacy is constrained, and political participation becomes mediated not solely by voter demand, but by organizational gatekeeping. Burnham's supporters, observing this intervention, may question whether their voices are secondary to party calculus, raising questions about how democracy functions within party structures. The stakes are heightened because by-elections, often seen as bellwethers of national sentiment, offer rare opportunities for public engagement and policy experimentation. By controlling candidate selection so tightly, Labour risks not only short-term backlash, but also longer-term scrutiny of its commitment to transparency and inclusivity. Ultimately, this episode is emblematic of the enduring tension in contemporary politics, the collision of individual ambition, grassroots support, and institutional authority. It challenges parties, commentators, and voters alike to consider what it means for democracy when internal decisions have such profound public consequences. The blocked candidacy of Andy Burnham is more than a news item. It is a lens through which we can examine the limits of party control, the resilience of local support, and the ever-present question of how power is exercised within modern democratic institutions. It is a moment that demands attention, reflection, and debate about the principles that underpin political legitimacy today. Party control versus grassroots representation. Labour's decision to block Andy Burnham's bid for the by-election underscores the enduring tension between centralized party authority and grassroots representation, a dynamic that has long shaped the trajectory of British politics. Political parties are simultaneously instruments of collective organization and vehicles of hierarchical control, and this duality often creates friction when local or popular preferences conflict with leadership priorities. Burnham, as a figure with established regional credibility and a base of public support, embodies the kind of political actor whose appeal transcends internal party calculations. His ability to mobilize voters and draw attention to regional issues presents both an opportunity and a challenge for party leadership. From the perspective of the hierarchy, permitting a high-profile candidate to run independently of strategic coordination may be perceived as a threat to ideological coherence, messaging discipline, and electoral positioning. Yet, the very factors that make Burnham appealing to constituents, the authenticity of his platform, his track record in public service, and his resonance with local concerns, are the same factors that demonstrate the value of allowing elected officials and aspirants to reflect the desires of the electorate rather than solely the preferences of party elites. The intervention raises critical questions about the nature of representation in contemporary political structures. When authority is concentrated at the top, how effectively can parties channel the aspirations and priorities of the public? The decision to block Burnham also illuminates the mechanisms through which party leadership exerts control, including candidate vetting, endorsement, and strategic gatekeeping, all of which can shape not only electoral outcomes but the broader perception of legitimacy and responsiveness. Supporters observing the exclusion of a favored candidate may interpret the move as a prioritization of internal discipline over participatory democracy, potentially eroding trust in institutional decision-making. Furthermore, the situation highlights the broader structural challenge inherent in representative politics. The balance between enabling individual agency within parties and maintaining organizational coherence necessary for policy implementation and electoral competitiveness. Burnham's blocked candidacy thus serves as a concrete example of how tensions between hierarchical authority and grassroots support manifest in practice, demonstrating that decisions made behind the scenes can have profound implications for voter engagement, the cultivation of political legitimacy, and the perception of fairness within democratic processes. In navigating these tensions, parties must continually weigh the benefits of centralized control against the risks of alienating the very constituents whose participation sustains the political system, revealing the delicate equilibrium required to reconcile institutional authority with the democratic imperative of genuine representation. Labor's decision to block Andy Burnham's by-election bid illustrates the complex interplay between internal strategy and electoral pragmatism that defines modern party politics. Political organizations operate not only as ideological collectives but also as strategic entities, constantly negotiating the tension between presenting a coherent platform and responding to the diverse preferences of their members and constituents. In this context, leadership decisions are rarely neutral. They are shaped by calculations about electability, message discipline, and the perceived risks of internal dissent. Burnham, as a high-profile figure with significant public recognition, presents both an opportunity and a challenge. On one hand, his candidacy could energize voter turnout, attract media attention, and foreground issues of regional and social importance. On the other hand, his prominence and independent standing may be perceived by party leadership as a potential disruption to the carefully managed narrative and strategic positioning that the party seeks to maintain. The prioritization of internal coherence over potential electoral enthusiasm reflects a long-standing pattern in which party hierarchies emphasize control and predictability, often at the expense of flexibility or innovation in candidate selection. This approach is particularly salient in moments of electoral uncertainty, such as by-elections, which are often interpreted as bellwethers for national political trends. By exerting control over who is permitted to stand, Labor's leadership communicates that stability, message alignment, and institutional authority take precedence over the potential dynamism introduced by individual candidates. Yet this strategy carries inherent trade-offs. While it may prevent immediate discord and preserve an appearance of unity, it risks alienating the very voters and activists whose engagement is essential to long-term electoral success. Moreover, the decision highlights the broader challenge of balancing strategic foresight with responsiveness to public sentiment. Parties that emphasize central control may inadvertently suppress innovation and the emergence of voices that could expand appeal or reinvigorate policy debate. In Burnham's case, the leadership's intervention signals a calculation that short-term coherence outweighs the potential benefits of his candidacy, but it also exposes the vulnerability of parties to critiques of elitism, overreach, and disconnection from grassroots priorities. The episode underscores the intricate calculus that defines internal strategy. Leadership must constantly weigh the benefits of control, message discipline, and predictability against the imperative to harness popular support, mobilize constituencies, and reflect the evolving interests of the electorate, revealing the strategic tensions that shape candidate selection and political legitimacy in contemporary democratic practice. The blocking of Andy Burnham's bid by Labor underscores the tangible risks that parties face when internal decisions are perceived as prioritizing hierarchy over popular support. Political organizations operate within a delicate balance. They must maintain centralized control to ensure coherence, message alignment, and strategic direction, yet they also depend fundamentally on the engagement and trust of their broader membership and electorate. When a high-profile figure like Burnham is excluded from a contest, the immediate consequence is the alienation of his supporters, who may interpret the decision as an assertion of elite authority rather than a reasoned, strategic judgment. This alienation can manifest in multiple ways, including diminished voter turnout, reduced participation in party activities, and erosion of enthusiasm among activists who feel their voices and preferences are secondary to the preferences of leadership. The reputational costs are equally significant. In an era of heightened media scrutiny and instant public feedback, such interventions are quickly framed as evidence of elitism or overreach, reinforcing narratives used by opposition parties and commentators to challenge the legitimacy and responsiveness of the organization. Beyond immediate optics, the decision illustrates the structural vulnerability of parties that rely excessively on hierarchical control. When supporters perceive that their engagement is undervalued, the foundational relationship between citizen and party is weakened, threatening long-term cohesion and electoral performance. Furthermore, the risk extends to internal cohesion, as factions within the party may view the leadership's intervention as a signal that dissenting viewpoints, even when supported by constituents, will be marginalized. This dynamic can exacerbate factionalism, reduce the willingness of members to contribute ideas, and encourage the emergence of parallel power bases that operate outside formal party mechanisms. The decision also serves as a case study in the complex calculus of legitimacy. Parties derive authority not only from procedural correctness, but from the perception that they respect and respond to the aspirations of their base. When this balance is disrupted, credibility is diminished, and the organization becomes vulnerable to both internal criticism and external electoral consequences. In Burnham's case, the leadership's move illustrates the tension between exercising strategic control and nurturing trust, highlighting the broader challenge that political organizations face in reconciling institutional authority with the expectations of a politically engaged, participatory electorate. The risks associated with this tension are ongoing, as the perception of exclusion can ripple through successive campaigns, influencing public engagement, internal morale, and the party's capacity to mobilize support effectively across constituencies. The Labour Party's decision to block Andy Burnham from standing in the by-election raises critical questions about the relationship between party hierarchies and democratic participation, highlighting the ways in which organizational gatekeeping can constrain the electorate's ability to express genuine political preferences. In representative democracies, the legitimacy of electoral outcomes depends not only on procedural adherence, but also on the perception that citizens have meaningful choices among candidates who reflect their values, priorities, and concerns. When a party exercises centralized authority to limit who may stand, it effectively narrows the spectrum of available options, reducing the electorate's agency in shaping outcomes according to internal calculations rather than popular will. This dynamic can undermine the fundamental principle that political representation should be responsive to constituents, creating a perception that participation is mediated more by elite decision-making than by voter engagement. The exclusion of Burnham, a figure with significant local and regional recognition, exemplifies how internal party mechanisms can supersede broader democratic impulses, prioritizing message discipline and strategic control over inclusivity and representational responsiveness. The implications extend beyond immediate voter choice, influencing public perceptions of transparency, fairness, and accountability within the political system. Constituents may question whether their voices are secondary to organizational priorities and whether parties function primarily as instruments of democratic expression or as vehicles for the consolidation of internal power. Furthermore, the situation exposes the broader tension between procedural legitimacy and substantive legitimacy. A candidate may be excluded in accordance with party rules, but the decision may nevertheless appear arbitrary or exclusionary to the public, eroding confidence in the electoral process and in the party itself. By constraining candidate selection, parties risk creating a disconnect between their organizational logic and the expectations of voters, which can reduce political participation, weaken grassroots activism, and heighten cynicism toward political institutions. The case also underscores the challenge of balancing strategic cohesion with democratic responsiveness. Parties must maintain some degree of internal coordination to ensure coherent messaging and electoral effectiveness, yet excessive control can stifle competition, diminish representational diversity, and alienate engaged citizens. Burnham's blocked candidacy therefore serves as a vivid illustration of how centralized authority within parties intersects with, and at times limits, the broader democratic function of elections, highlighting the ongoing tension between internal organizational imperatives and the principles of participatory representation that are central to the legitimacy of democratic systems. The blocked candidacy of Andy Burnham in the Labor by-election exemplifies the broader significance of internal party decisions for the functioning and perception of democratic institutions, demonstrating how organizational control can shape political outcomes far beyond a single electoral contest. In contemporary politics, parties serve as intermediaries between the electorate and governance, translating public preferences into policy and representation, yet their internal mechanisms of candidate selection and strategic oversight exert profound influence over the scope and quality of choice available to voters. By restricting Burnham's ability to stand, Labor's leadership exercised authority that reinforces the boundaries of acceptable candidacy, signaling to both members and the public that internal calculus takes precedence over broader considerations of public engagement and appeal. This action illuminates the ways in which parties actively manage electoral risk, control messaging, and seek to preserve cohesion, yet it simultaneously raises critical questions about legitimacy, accountability, and transparency. The decision's implications extend beyond the immediate by-election, as it shapes the narrative around who holds influence within political structures and whose voices are amplified or marginalized. Observers, analysts, and constituents are prompted to examine the mechanisms through which authority is exercised and to consider the extent to which party gatekeeping aligns with or diverges from the principles of democratic representation. Furthermore, the episode underscores the tension inherent in balancing institutional control with responsiveness to constituent demands. Parties that privilege centralized authority risk alienating activists, voters, and potential candidates, potentially undermining long-term engagement, trust, and the credibility of the political system. The exclusion of a prominent figure like Burnham also highlights the symbolic dimensions of political decision-making. Beyond procedural legitimacy, such actions convey messages about inclusion, equity, and the openness of political institutions to diverse perspectives and independent judgment. In a broader context, the episode reflects the ongoing challenge facing modern democracies: how to reconcile the practical necessities of organizational discipline, strategic planning, and ideological coherence with the normative expectations of participatory engagement, accountability, and fair representation. Burnham's blocked bid serves as a focal point for these considerations, illustrating how single decisions within party hierarchies resonate across political discourse, influence public perception, and shape debates about legitimacy, authority, and the distribution of power within democratic systems. The event invites scrutiny not only of immediate tactical choices, but of the structural and institutional arrangements that govern political participation, emphasizing the ways in which party mechanisms and internal governance have consequences that ripple through electoral politics, public confidence, and the broader functioning of representative democracy.